Welcome, everybody, back to the Pat and Mike Show. Asset protection and estate preservation attorneys at the Rakowski Law Firm. Last episode, we spoke a bunch about asset protection. We talked about who would be a good candidate to do asset protection, what it is. And since then, we got a lot of questions about how do you use asset protection strategies to plan for long-term care. Pat, I mean, you get that question probably all the time as well.
Daily. Yep.
Daily, right. So I think we use the next 20 minutes or so to jump into, what does it look like? What are some of the strategies? How do we do it? And what are the rules? Can we do that all in 20 minutes?
For sure. Yeah. I think we can cover all of this in 20 minutes. Easy.
Right.
And then we break for lunch. But yeah, we talked a lot last time about asset protection strategies, and I think a lot of people have this idea that asset protection is only for people with a ton of assets, which, by the way, is just kind of a matter of perception. I mean, what is a ton of assets? Is 200,000, a million, 20 million? It varies person to person. Pretty much everybody, almost everybody we sit down with says, regardless of what they have, I don't have very much and my situation is really simple. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it really varies. And often, quite candidly, the people who are most in need of asset protection are not necessarily the folks with, many millions of dollars, because, while you don't want to get dinged and you don't want to lose, $500,000 or $1 million, that would really be bad. But if all you have is, several hundred thousand or a few hundred thousand, for you, if you lose a portion of that, that will dramatically affect your life, your spouse's life, and what you have to leave for your kids. And so how do we protect kind of regular families from those threats? I mean, that's a major part of our practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the biggest threats to someone's estate is the cost of long-term care. And statistically, a lot of us are going to end up needing that. So let's start by, Pat, what is long-term care? What does that term mean? What are we talking about here?
For sure. Long-term care is actually a pretty broad spectrum. But basically, long-term care is any sort of care that is a chronic condition as opposed to acute, meaning you're in it for the long term. And I know that sounds reductive, but it is. If you're in assisted living, low-level assisted living, that's a form of long-term care, as is memory care, as is skilled nursing care. They're all forms of long-term care, meaning it's not like a hospital visit or rehab where you're going to go in, you'll get better. You had a fall and now you have to rehab from it. It's, look, this is kind of going to be the way that things are going forward. And some form of long-term care impacts almost 2/3 of Americans. And when I say impact, I mean happens to them, because it certainly impacts you if your spouse needs to go into long-term care. And I didn't mention it at the beginning, but in-home care is another form of long-term care. Basically, if you have somebody coming into the home on a regular basis, that's another form of long-term care. So it's any sort of situation where it's a repeated, ongoing, this is just sort of the way things are.
And Pat, would you agree that just how much it costs has dramatically changed over the years, where at one point, I mean, rewind the clock 15, 20 years, it was a much more affordable idea or thing that people would need. And then also now people are living longer and there's less solutions out there as far as insurance products, long-term care insurance, that are affordable for people to utilize.
The way things look today, because you're absolutely right on that, the situation in 2020 is so far gone from what it was in 2000, from what it was in 1980.
Do you mean 2020 specifically, or you just mean currently?
Oh, I mean today, but we won't even get into that. That's a whole other podcast.
Totally.
But yeah, just to take like two 20-year chunks from now to 20 years ago and then 20 years before that, they have nothing in common with each other. They truly don't. In that, one really good example is the Medicaid numbers. So Medicaid has this number, what they say is kind of the average cost of a month of care. And as far back as those numbers go is 1997. And in 97, the cost of a month of care, according to them, which is the lowest rate you're ever going to see, was about $3,400 a month. Today, the lowest rate, according to them, is $8,600 a month. And realistically, you're going to be paying a lot more, like 10, 11,000. It depends where you are, but you're talking almost a 250%, 2.5 times increase over 20 years. I mean, those are college tuition level inflation numbers. And then you go back even further, and people really weren't doing that type of long-term care absent some sort of very, very serious illness. This is one of those double-edged sword sort of situations. As medical care has improved, as our ability to take care of folks, keep us living longer has improved, that's fantastic. But it costs money and it takes time. And that's a challenge that exists now that really didn't exist. You go back 30, 40 years. And so what a lot of people went through is, oh, this is what happened to my parents, or this is what happened to my grandparents. Well, those rules don't apply anymore. The situation today is so far gone from that, you almost can't compare the two.
So it sounds like people are living longer. The cost of care is more. And so we're probably going to talk about something that we can, use to solve this issue that's out there.
Yeah, we will. And before that, though, because a lot of people, when we start talking about this, there are two things that come up a lot. And the first one is, we will just take care of ourselves at home. We made this promise. You're never going to go to assisted living. You're never going to go to a nursing home. You hear that a lot. And that is good, and that is noble, and I completely understand where people are coming from on that. But in many, many cases, it is impractical and extremely dangerous, both for the person who needs care and the person providing it. You get situations, I mean, we all know that women live longer than men. So you'll see these situations where it's the guy who is having more of the health issues. And now you've got a situation where, someone in their 80s, an 85-year-old woman is trying to help her also 85-year-old husband out of the tub. Only, she weighs 120 pounds and he weighs 250. That is not safe for anyone involved. And you just see a whole lot of that because people make those promises when they're young and healthy without realizing that, or without, I guess, fully appreciating that by the time it happens, you might well not be in a position to do that. And what happens when you have someone with Alzheimer's who's wandering out of the house at 1 a.m? Are you in your 70s or 80s going to be running after someone in a Michigan February trying to bring them back in? So I just want to say that off the bat, because a lot of people, they immediately reject it. They say, we've got this, we're going to take care of this. And it's not just a 24/7 job, because it is. I mean, it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it is a physically and emotionally demanding job as well, beyond what a lot of us are capable of.
Yeah. Interesting to that point. I've actually heard a statistic that more so caregivers will pass, or more often than you would think, caregivers actually pass away before the person they're caring for, just because of how taxing, how stressful that it is on a person to take care of someone when the needs are that high.
Truly. And similarly, there are situations where someone will have fought for months or years saying, I'm not putting them in assisted living, I'm not putting them in a nursing home, I'm not doing it. And then eventually either they reach the breaking point or the kids kind of force it to happen. And you can see these people blossom. You can see these folks where before they weren't sleeping, they were constantly stressed, all of this and that. And then once the spouse or once the person in need of care is receiving that care, then they can go back to being the partner, being the daughter, being the person who's there for them, not the person who has to handle the bathing, the toileting, the chasing down, the locking the doors, all of that. And it really is a dramatic difference. And one further point on that is when you have someone who's a single person, who's like, I am staying at home, A, often unsafe, but B, also, you get a lot of that social isolation. I think a lot of us are feeling that now from the quarantine and the lockdown and all of that. But can you imagine, basically never seeing anyone? So strangely, you'll see folks when they get into assisted living or get into a nursing situation, they blossom again. All of a sudden, they're surrounded by people with similar experience who had a similar childhood. They can talk about, music and movies and TV shows and stuff that, their kids didn't watch, and, they'll humor them with and whatnot. But it can really be a much more positive situation than people think.
So let's talk about then, like, how can asset protection help with this? Because I know, Pat, you probably have the same experience. We work with a lot of professionals, financial advisors, CPAs, and it seems like the days of affordable long-term care insurance have kind of gone away. It sounds like they're trying to come up with hybrid life insurance style policies, but they can get pretty expensive. So what can someone do on an asset protection side of things? And what, governmental programs or what options are there to pay for this instead of just straight out of pocket?
For sure. Well, because those are the three main ways. I should say the two, and then we'll give the third. The first is pay out of pocket. If you have $10,000 or $12,000 every month of disposable income, well, there you go. Just pay that and you're taken care of. That doesn't cover a whole lot of people. And as for long-term care insurance, it's really hard to insure against something that's going to happen to 2/3 of people. You can insure against a car accident or a house fire because it's unlikely, but it's really challenging to insure against something that is probably almost certainly going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's where we get into the Medicaid side of things. And this is the second kind of dirty word, the second thing that people like to avoid. Number one, don't want to go to a nursing home in the first place. Number two, we don't even want to talk about Medicaid because those are those horrific Medicaid nursing homes. But Medicaid, in fact, pays almost 2/3 of all skilled nursing care in the country. Michigan is no exception to that. If you are in a nursing home, or if you go to any nursing home, almost any nursing home, there's a couple exceptions, but virtually any nursing home in Michigan, the majority of people are on Medicaid. Medicaid is the most common payer for long-term care. And there's sort of two camps of Medicaid. There is the younger person, lower income form of Medicaid that a lot of us are familiar with. But Medicaid has also become the provider of long-term care expense for almost everyone in the country. Well, not almost everyone, but the majority of people who wind up needing care. It is not this kind of abstract, oh, that only happens to a couple of people. It's more than half.
And so how does that work? I've heard, there's rules, right? I mean, there's always rules with everything. There's things called a spend down. There's look backs. Like, how do you navigate all these waters?
For sure. You navigate them by calling 1-800-ESTATES and talking to a long-term care specialist at the Rakowski firm. But some sort of broader things and some things that as people start to do research into this, they'll hear about. Number one, to understand, we have Medicaid is a federal program that's administered differently by all 50 states. There's some common rules, there are some different rules. So be really, really cautious in terms of, oh, this is what we did for my cousin, or this is what we did for my grandpa. If they weren't in Michigan, probably working under a different set of rules. Similarly, the rules change on the very least at an annual basis. And in fact, they're updated periodically throughout the year. So the rules that start out the year may well not be the rules by July. That was the case last year. That's the case this year. But just some broad kind of general rules. There is in Michigan a 5-year look back. What that means is if you gift away anything within 5 years of needing Medicaid, and gifting away is more than you might think. If you pay for your grandkids' college, that's a gift. If you sell your home to a nephew or to a child for less than fair market value, the difference between what you sold it for and what it was worth, that's a gift. Certainly, if you give away cash, that's a gift. You put your kid's name on the house, you just gifted them a portion of the value. There's a whole lot of things that people do that they don't intend to be gifts, but which actually are, and can penalize you and jeopardize your Medicaid eligibility. And they look back 5 years to see when you did that. So if you did it within 5 years of needing to go to a nursing home, there's a real risk of a penalty there. Right?
And Pat, I want to give us tying some of those concepts together is so often, and I'm sure you experience the same thing, where people are just Googling different things, and being that it's a federal program, each state has different rules. We'll have families come in where they're like, oh, yep, we took all of mom and dad's money, we gave it to all the kids, we spent it all on our mortgages and everything, so it's gone, good to go, we're ready to go have mom and dad or mom or dad on Medicaid. And there's certain things we can fix, and there's certain things we can't fix.
Those are the worst, because if someone deeds a house to a kid, okay, we can get the house back. Or in rare occasions, if they give cash to them and the kid kept it separate, we can get it back. But if that money went to pay college tuition, or that money went to pay down a mortgage, I mean, how are you getting that back? Are the kids going to then have to take a home equity line against their home to pay back the money mom and dad gave them at interest? Even though they're low interest rates right now, that's not ideal. So, yeah, that is not a, people talk about the spend down, which we'll talk about in just a second. That is not a spend down. That is a gift, and that incurs penalty. We really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because there are two sort of aspects to, three really, but only two aspects to eligibility: income, assets, and medically eligible. So number one, you got to be medically eligible. You got to be over the age of 65 and have some sort of illness or impairment so that you need to go into nursing care. That's just a given. If you're healthy and fine at home, wonderful, just stay there. As for income, a lot of people think that there is an income limit where, oh, because of my Social Security and pension, I've got too much money and I don't qualify. That is true for low income Medicaid, at under 65 low income Medicaid. That is not true at all for long-term care Medicaid. There is no income limit whatsoever for long-term care Medicaid. Now, I guess if your income is, like I said, 10 or 12,000 a month, probably not going to be a candidate. But generally speaking, no matter what your income is, you can still qualify for long-term care Medicaid. And that brings us to the third issue, kind of the biggest issue and the one where we can be of the most help, and that is assets. There's a couple different sets of rules for how much assets you're allowed to have. And they vary whether you're a single person or a married couple. Basic rule, this is leaving out a lot of nuance, but basic rule for a single person or for a married couple, let's start with a married couple, you're allowed a home, you're allowed a vehicle, and you're allowed about $128,000 in other assets. But that is half the assets up to that 128 mark. That gets a lot of people in trouble. They think, oh, I've got my home, I've got my car, and I've got 120,000. I get to keep it all. No, you don't. You get to keep 60,000. You get to keep half your assets up to that maximum. Meaning, if you've got $1 million, you get to keep 128,000. If you've got, 120,000, you get to keep 60. So it's half the assets up to that maximum, plus a house and a car. Now the house value tops out at 595,000. Not generally a big issue for a lot of folks, but it could be, so that's something to consider. Big drop off when you go from a married couple to a single person. The reason you're allowed 128,000 is they say, okay, with a married couple, we have to have some cash, some stuff, some resources for that healthy community spouse. They don't allow that with a single person. Single person, you get a house, a car, $2,000. That's it. House, a car, and $2,000. And so you can see there's a pretty steep drop off between the two. And in the rare situation, uncommon situation where both spouses are in the nursing home, you get a house, a car, and $3,000. And I always like to pause at this part because people say, oh, so the house is protected. No, it's not. The house is exempt as long as it stays a house. If you're a single person and all your income has to go to the nursing home and you're only allowed $2,000, how are you paying for that house? How are you paying the taxes? How are you paying the utilities? How is that actually happening? So there's what the law says, house, a car, and $2,000. And then there's reality, which is that house is going to get sold quickly. And when the house gets sold, now it's not a house anymore. Now it's cash. And assuming the house sells for more than $2,000, that's going to put you way over your eligible limit. So that's sort of the situation.
I want to jump in here, and I just want to say I'm having a great time interviewing you. You're doing a great job.
I know, right?
But I think this goes into a little bit of something that comes up a lot is, can the government, can Medicaid, can the state, can they take my stuff? Mm-hmm. And would you say that really under the rules, they can't take anything, but poor planning puts you in a bad spot in which you have no other option but to sell things that some people think are otherwise protected?
Yes, and we're going to do a yes and on that one, because that is totally true. A lot of people think, oh, the government is going to come and take my stuff. Not yet, they won't, but they will. They're coming for it. So they will not reach out and take your stuff while you're alive and applying for Medicaid. What they'll do is deny you. They'll deny your application, which effectively winds up being the same thing because the money has to go, the house has to get sold, the money goes. But they do actually reach out and take your stuff through estate recovery after you've passed. What that means is if you have any assets, so let's say that you have that home, right? And you have a will that says that home goes to my kid. And yeah, you had to spend down to $2,000 and everything else is gone. But that house, my will says that it's going to go to my child. When that house goes to probate, because all wills go to probate, when that house goes through probate, the state will reach out and take it. What'll happen is a representative from the state will show up and say, hold up, before it goes to them, we provided their care. We provided the parents' care for the last year. That cost us $120,000. We're going to take that $120,000 from the estate. This is called estate recovery. We are going to recover the money spent on them from the estate. Now, if it's less than the value of the house, it'll get the difference. If it's more than the value of the house, they'll take the whole thing. And routinely, that's what winds up happening, just given the cost of long-term care. So did they take it while you're alive? No, but there's a lot of pressure on you to spend it. But then after you pass, through estate recovery, they can actually reach out and take it.
So the last thing I think we need to get into here is, asset protection. Like, how does this play into this? What can I do? What can be done so that I don't have to spend down all my assets if, in the event, me or my spouse need long-term care?
For sure. And there's kind of two camps to this. There is effective pre-planning, and then there's crisis planning, both of which are ways to protect assets. I'm a big fan of pre-planning. I like to get ahead of things. I know you are as well, Mike. But the idea there is with the proper trust structure, you can protect assets from the cost of long-term care, meaning you can set up a trust to protect your assets in the event that you need care, but still have them to benefit your spouse who may be at home, who may have need of those resources, and also to supplement your level of care. Just to be clear, Medicaid is not a lesser or inferior level of care, but it's a very basic level of care. So if you have access to additional resources, you can supplement that care, pay for physical therapist, pay for a certified nurse's aide, that sort of thing, but also give your spouse the security to know that they're going to be okay, that they have these resources available for them. And then those would pass to the kids, the beneficiaries, whoever you want them to afterwards. And this is a place where really important to understand that if you have a trust, unless it was set up explicitly with this in mind, it is not going to do anything to protect you. A standard revocable living trust or any form of revocable living trust will do nothing to shield your assets in the event of long-term care. And that's what most people have. They are great for avoiding probate. They're great for getting stuff to the kids. They do absolutely nothing when it comes to protecting stuff from long-term care. And then the next step, or I should say, if you have that in place, fantastic. That's the pre-planning side. You want to get at least 5 years ahead of your nursing care needs on that. And that's why we call it pre-planning. That has to do with the 5-year look back. There's a lot of moving parts that go into that. And if you have questions, feel free to call us, feel free to email us. But then there's also crisis planning. Mike, you want to talk a little bit about crisis planning?
I don't think I want to talk about anything today. You're doing such a good job.
Okay, all right.
I'll clean it up a little bit for you. So the question we get so often is it too late to do planning? You know, someone might need care now, or there's no way that they're going to make it to the 5 years. You know, are there still options? I know with like proper planning outside of the 5 years, you can protect almost 100% of what you're looking to protect. But what if I don't have the 5 years? What if someone's in care now and we just need to shut it off because we're about to run out of assets? What are my options then?
For sure. Realistically, the only time you have no options is when there are no assets left to protect. Those can be a little rough, where people come to us and they say, you know, mom's been in the nursing home for 5 years, all the money is gone. What do we do now? It's like, well, I wish you would come 5 years ago. At this point, you can't get it back. It is an important thing to understand. Once it's gone, it's not coming back. But it's also important to note that it's almost never too late. If somebody is already in care, if somebody already has a diagnosis, if we're closer than 5 years, there are still options. But the amount that you can protect, the type of work you can do, it shrinks the closer you get to needing care. But there is almost always something that you can do. And it starts with having the right powers of attorney in place. It starts with talking to an attorney who specializes in this area, because there are a ton of folks out there who write wills. Just to say, a ton of folks out there who write a will, a ton of folks out there who write some form of a power of attorney. But unless they work routinely with Medicaid, unless they work routinely with asset protection and with nursing homes, this is just not their area of expertise. You know, I do not do divorce cases. Mike doesn't do traffic accidents. Neither one of us does dog bites. Those are not the things that we do. When it comes to law, just like with medicine, you have a specialty, and it is best to stay within your, I feel, it's best to stay within your lane. And so knowing that it's never too late is an important first step, because a lot of people and a lot of attorneys will say, oh, just spend down. You know, you have this much money. Once you spend all of it and you get to this point, then you'll be okay, and then you'll qualify. And that is one way to do it. But there are also ways that you can do it that retain a lot more control, retain a lot more of your assets, and make them much more beneficial to yourself, your spouse, your beneficiaries. So just to know, it's never too late. But if you think it's an issue, reach out, call. It's no cost for an initial consultation to at least have us take a look at things and review it, so you know where you stand, rather than you know, I don't know where Google got their JD, but an awful lot of the time that's where the information is coming from, you know. So good idea probably to talk to someone. And again, can't emphasize this enough, every state is different. We talk to attorneys in all 50 states, almost all 50 states, and it's similar but different, and it's those little differences that make the biggest difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from everything that you've given to us today, Pat, is just be ahead of this. You know, talk to someone who specializes in it. It's obviously very complicated, but knowing the rules and just having some kind of insight on your specific situation can be incredibly important in this area.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's the tiniest thing. You know, sometimes it's like, oh, if we just do X, Y, and Z, it can make a huge difference. But if you don't know, you don't know.
For sure. Beautiful. Thanks, Pat. Next week, we're going to come back with part 3 of this. We're going to talk about other layers of asset protection, because it's not always about you and creditor protection, but it all can also be, you know, how does this translate to beneficiaries, you know, protecting distributions to beneficiaries, special needs trusts. So we got plenty for you. If you found value in today's information, you know, share it out, like our page. But we definitely appreciate you being here for the Pat Show today.
Well, I didn't know it was going to turn out that way, but yeah. So next time, I guess I'll interview you.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.